Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to talk about writing methods in Java. So let's get after it. The overarching goal of this unit is to be able to write classes, but we've been exposed to enough classes to know that most of the code in a class is methods. And so it's very important that we are on point with our methods game. So to that end, we only have two learning goals today. Number one is that we can write methods, including void methods, methods that have a return value, and methods that have parameters. And second, we want to be able to properly document our methods with preconditions and postconditions. From past course experience, you probably already have a pretty good idea of what a method is, but just to help the big picture, let's talk about it at a high level. So a method in computer science is kind of like teaching a dog a trick. And when you go to train your dog, it's a two-step process. Number one is the actual training phase, where you teach the dog to associate some sort of a command or a word with a desired behavior. For example, the word sit should mean that the dog sits down. Then, once the dog is trained, every time you use the word, the dog does the behavior. Writing a method in computer science is very similar to training a dog. In fact, when we write methods in Java, we're training Java to do things that it didn't know how to do before. And so this is also a two-step process. The first thing we do is we teach Java to associate a word with a behavior, and that means write a method. In the example, the method is called speak, and what we're doing is we're training Java to understand that when we say the word speak, we want Java to print line the word woof. And once Java's trained, once we've written this method, then every time we use the word speak, Java will do the behavior. So for example, if I type speak semicolon, Java will print line woof. When we're working with methods, it's absolutely critical to understand how the flow of control works when a method call is encountered. So in the example, I have a substring that I'm calling on the string hello. And so the first step is that a method is called using its name. And as soon as that happens, our code pauses and control jumps to the method. And the reason it does that is that our code can't continue until we've figured out, in this case, what the substring is. So we call the method, control jumps to the method executes, and then when the method's done, control returns back to our code, possibly returning a value, possibly not, and then the code resumes. And so this illustrates the basic flow of control that we see when we call and execute a method. Whenever we want to write a method, we have to start with the method header, which is the very top line of the method, and it contains three different things. The first one is called a return type, and the return type just means what sort of answer this method will produce. In this case, this method is going to produce an answer that's a character. It could be a string, it could be an int, it could be a double. It's possible that our method will not return or have any answer at all, in which case we would put void there. The identifier comes next, and that's really just the name that we give the method, so it can be whatever we want. And then finally, at the end, in parentheses, we have what's called the formal parameters list. And the formal parameters are the things that we're going to send the method as input. And so this specifies the type of parameter. In fact, we have three of them. The first one's going to be an int, the second one's going to be an int, and the third one's going to be a string. It also specifies names of the parameters, so we can choose. This first parameter is an int. We're going to call it num1. The second parameter is called num2. The third parameter is called message, and then also specifies the order. So it's going to be an int, then an int, then a string. So it's the number, the type, and the order of the parameters that will send the method. Once we've written the method header, the next step is to specify the method body, which goes between a set of curly brackets. The method body specifies the exact job of the method, what it does, and typically we're going to see that it uses the parameters. So if I bothered to send an int, and a string to the method, then odds are that somewhere in the method we're going to see those parameters used for something. At the end of our method, we're going to find possibly a return statement. Not all methods return values, but if they do, we'll see a return statement. And the return statement does three things. Number one, it immediately ends the method. So it wouldn't even matter if we had code after the return statement, it would be unreachable. The other thing is that the return specifies what the answer actually is. So in this case, we're leaving the method and we're sending back this variable result. The final thing with the return statement is that the return statement must be consistent with the return type. So in the method header, we specified that the method would return a character, and so that's what we have to do down here. If we said string, we'd have to return a string. If this said int calc, we would have to return an int. Must be consistent with the return type. One last thing to mention about the method body is that in the method, all of the variables that are created here, so that would include sum and result, and actually the parameters as well, num1, num2, and message. All of these variables that are created inside of our method are really temporary variables. When the method is called, these variables will be created, they'll come into existence, and when the method ends, these variables will all be destroyed. So really, the variables that you create in a method can only be used inside of that method. Now that we've completed the writing of our method, let's put it all together by also calling our method and seeing the whole big picture and how it all happens. So just to review, remember that we started to write our method by writing the method header. That was the very first line, and it began with the return type, what sort of answer the method would return. It could have been void in the case that we would want our method to not return an answer, but this method does indeed return an answer. The next thing we did was we gave the method a name and we called it calc. Finally, we specified what are called the parameters, which is the number, type, and order of the information that we are going to send to the method. In this case, we did 2 ints and a string. After we wrote the method header, we wrote the method body, which specifies what the method actually does and what it returns, if anything. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the top where we call the method. So we see right here that we call on our calc method, and we send it 3 parameters, specifically the number 3, the variable count, which you can see is equal to 1, and the string hello. And functionally what happens is these values get transferred to the method. Now, a little bit of vocab here, because really we have 2 sets of parameters. We have the set of parameters here at the top, 3, count, and hello, and we have a different parameters list down here in the method. And it's important to understand that those 2 lists have different names so that we can distinguish between them. The parameters that we send when we call the method are called the actual parameters because these are the actual values that we're sending to the method. However, the ones down in the method header, these are called the formal parameters, and that's because functionally they're just placeholders. Num1, num2, and message aren't really anything until we call the method. They're simply sitting there waiting to be called upon, waiting to be given values, and in this case, the values will be 3, 1, and hello. So once we've called the method, once the parameters are transferred, the actual parameters transferred to the formal parameters, then the method body executes. And so the first task in the method, you will notice, is to create a variable sum and add together num1 and num2. Now we know that num1 is 3 and num2 is 1, so it shouldn't be surprising that when we add them together, sum will hold a 4. After this, we have another calculation where we compute a char called result. And what we do is we take a look at our message parameter and we do char at sum. Well, we just calculated that the sum is 4, so we're really doing char at 4, and character 4 in the word hello is the letter O. So after our calculations, we now find the return statement. And so the job of the return statement is to send an answer back. And so that's exactly what happens. When we say return result, that O, that result value, transfers back to where the method was called, and in this case is going to be stored in CH. In other words, just to clarify, the method we called is going to return a value, and ch is being set equal to that return. So the variable ch will hold the character O. Now that we've gone through all the details of how methods are written, I'd like you to try to write one on your own. And what I want you to do is to write a method that computes a dog's age converted to human years. The way we'll do that is in the method header, we'll have one parameter that represents the dog's age. Maybe your dog is 1, 5, 7. And the method body will take that age and multiply it by 7 to get the number of human years. So for example, a dog who is 5 years old would be 5 times 7, 35 in human years. When you're done, I want you to write a line of code that displays the human age of a 9-year-old dog. So not only are you going to write the method, but you're going to show that you can call it. So pause the video, and when you're ready, we'll go through the answer. Okay, so here's one possible answer, and yours may look a little different. The first thing I did was I specified the return type as int. I figured the method would return something that was in the directions, but int made sense to me because I knew it was going to be a number, and ages usually don't contain a decimal point. So I didn't choose double. I specified a name for the method. There's a high chance you picked a different name, and that's okay, right? That's a choice. Here's my parameter, int age. This is the age of the dog. And I have a very simple calculation where I'm returning the age of the dog times 7. Then when I go to call the method, I put mine in a system.out.println to avoid having to write 2 lines of code. But you will notice that I say get dog age, I call my method, and I send it the 9 because I want the age of a 9-year-old dog. And in this case, what will happen is the return value will be printlined because I'm calling the method in a printline statement. Before we end our discussion on methods, the last thing we want to talk about is how to document them. And by document, I mean comments. Documentation isn't necessarily the most fun thing to do with our code, but it's actually really important because it allows us to communicate our code to others and, quite frankly, ourselves. In industry, every method should be documented, and if you don't, you can honestly get in trouble for that because the expectation is that when you write code and then it becomes someone else's job, they need to be able to read that code, or other members of your team need to be able to read it. And if you can't effectively communicate with your team, you're not going to be working there. So frequently methods are documented with what are called pre and post conditions. And in the next slide, we'll discuss exactly what those are. Preconditions and postconditions are comments, 2 specific comments that go at the top of each and every method that you do. So a precondition ends up being what the method expects from you when it's called. In other words, if I'm going to call this method, what do I need to know, or what does the method expect I'm going to do? Usually this has something to do with the parameters and what it's expecting from me in terms of those parameters. A lot of times methods that don't have parameters don't need a precondition, so this is a comment that you will use sometimes. A postcondition is what the method promises to do for you. In other words, what is calculated, what is returned, what is the job of this method. The key thing is that the post condition describes what the method is doing, not how it's doing it. In other words, we're not going to try to re-explain the code, because if I want to know what the code does, I can look at the code. This is the high-level overview. What does it do, not how. And in both cases, pre and post conditions, we want to keep them as brief as possible because nobody wants to read a paragraph about what your methods do. And quite frankly, your methods shouldn't be long or complex enough that you can't explain what they're doing in 1 to maybe 2 sentences. The best way to understand what pre and post conditions are is to actually see an example. And so in the method below, it calculates something to do with leap years. And hopefully, just from the pre and post condition I've written, you can have a really good idea of what this method does without actually having to think too hard about the code. So the precondition, remember, is what the method expects from me. And what the method expects is that the year, notice that the year is the parameter to the method, is an integer greater than 0. So in other words, this is communicating to me that it's not going to work for negatives. Then the post condition is what the method promises to do for me. And it says returns true if year, the parameter, is a leap year, and false otherwise. Notice how short and succinct that is, but it's so clear. I gotta send it a number bigger than 0. It's gonna tell me true or false whether that is or isn't a leap year. Anyone can understand that. And notice again, the post condition isn't telling me how it does it. If I want to know how it does it, well, I can go down and study this code. Writing pre and post conditions that are good can actually be quite hard to get used to until you get some experience with it. And so I don't necessarily expect you to be experts, but I want you to have some familiarity with it, and we will practice it a bit. So to check your understanding, I've put the getDogAge method from the previous understanding check, and what I'd like you to do is pause the video and take a crack at writing the pre and post condition to this. And when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll take a look at a sample answer. So here's my answer for the pre and post condition. Remember that the precondition is telling me information I need to call the method, what I need to expect, or what the method expects from me. So in this case, it's expecting that I'm going to send age as an integer greater than 0 because negative ages aren't a thing. The post condition is telling what the method does. And so in this case, the method does two things. It computes, 1, and it returns, 2, the dog's age translated to human ears. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to understand that that post condition does not explain how the method does that. It doesn't talk about multiplying by 7 or any of that. The post condition is designed to tell me the what, not the how. If I want to know the how, I can look at the code. In this lesson, we discussed how to write methods, including void methods, methods that return a value, and methods that have parameters. We also discussed how to properly document methods with pre and post conditions. Thanks for watching.